52-year-old Deputy Sheriff Malcolm Rivera, 52, from the courtroom where an arrogant cop attacked a federal prosecutor to the back room of the police station where case files quietly disappeared to Rivera's home being raided in retaliation for speaking the truth. This is the story of what happens when one man refuses to look the other way. No more cover-ups. No more excuses. No more silence. And if you think these stories aren't happening in America today, think again. If you believe in accountability, justice, and unwavering truth, click subscribe now, because this channel tells the stories others try to bury. And today, we're digging them all up. Eastbrook streets look different after dark. Deputy Chief Malcolm Rivera, 52, drives his department's unmarked SUV around the corner of Marlow and 9th, the same intersection he walked as a teenager with his fists clenched and his eyes downcast. The city has changed. New murals, glass storefronts, community gardens, but the air still carries that weight, that tension. That question still lingers in the eyes of every brown and black boy who stands still for a moment as a patrol car passes. Will I be next? Rivera parks a block from the courthouse, the engine idling, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. He always arrives early for these hearings. Routine, ritual, control. His uniform, charcoal black, pressed silver badge polished to a mirror, isn't just for show. It's armor. A quiet declaration that he had survived long enough to rise above a system that had once failed him. Today, he would see another man go to trial. Officer Brent Callahan. The irony twisted something deep in Malcolm's gut. Callahan reminded him of every cop who had ever stopped him for driving too nice, every patrolman who had made assumptions, hurled insults, and concluded based on skin color rather than behavior. But Callahan had gone further. Too far. The file Malcolm had reviewed weeks ago, the file he had read in the silence of his office, gritting his teeth until his gums ached, had detailed a pattern. Excessive force, racism, complaints that mysteriously disappeared, internal investigations that died in silence. And then came the tipping point, an assault in court. Callahan had taken a woman, pushed her into a public courtroom, and humiliated her in front of witnesses, all because she had spoken up. She hadn't spoken up. She hadn't been rude. But she was black, and she was there. That was enough. What Callahan didn't know, and what would shatter his entire illusion of control, was who that woman was. Malcolm stepped out of his car, the wind catching the edge of his coat. The courthouse loomed ahead, clean-cut stone against a graying sky. His steps were slow and measured. People greeted him with cautious nods and respectful murmurs of "Chief." But no one asked how he was. They never did. He entered the courtroom and took his usual seat in the rear gallery, just as the early crowd filed in. Lawyers whispered near the bench. A bailiff adjusted his tie. Cameras were not allowed inside, but that didn't mean this wasn't a performance. Callahan sat near the front, his back straight, arms spread confidently across the bench behind him, like he owned the place. His face wore that smug expression Malcolm knew too well, the one that said, "I'll walk away from this like I always do." But the woman he had grabbed, Serena Maxwell, was not just another angry civilian. She was a federal prosecutor, and she had pulled out her Department of Justice credentials in the courtroom, badge gleaming like a sword unsheathed. The room had frozen. Callahan had paled. And that moment had triggered this hearing. As the proceedings began, Malcolm's eyes didn't leave Callahan. The prosecutor opened with a quiet but biting summary of the incident, describing the abuse of power, the public nature of the assault, and the long paper trail of misconduct that had finally caught up with the officer. Callahan's attorney objected, of course, claimed bias, claimed misunderstanding, claimed provocation. Typical deflection. blame the woman for not staying silent. But Malcolm didn't flinch. He'd lived that story. Once, at 17, he had been slammed against a wall by an officer who said his sneakers looked stolen. No report, no apology. Just a bruise and a lesson. The message had been clear. You don't belong in places of power. You survive if you stay small. But Malcolm hadn't stayed small. He had clawed his way up through the ranks, through double standards and whispered slurs, through colleagues who called him hothead when he showed passion, and soft when he held back. He had learned to speak with precision, to lead with restraint, and to fight with a memory as long as the city's injustice. The judge now called for a recess. Lawyers stood, chairs scraped, murmurs resumed. Malcolm rose slowly. Every movement is deliberate. He walked down the aisle, not to confront, not to perform, but because he needed Callahan to see him. Callahan turned. Their eyes met. A flicker of something passed between them. Recognition? Contempt? Fear? Malcolm couldn't tell, but he didn't break the gaze. "You good at cleaning messes, Chief?" Callahan said under his breath, lips barely moving. "Because this city's about to make one." Malcolm didn't respond right away. He simply studied this man who'd smirked his way through complaint after complaint. Then, quietly, "You made the mess, Callahan, and I'm here to make sure you finally face it." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten, but his tone was iron-wrapped in velvet. Final. Outside the courtroom, the air had shifted. You could feel it. This wasn't about one cop. It never had been. This was about a culture that protected men like Callahan. A machine that pretended justice was blind while quietly tipping the scales. And Malcolm Rivera? He wasn't just a cop anymore. He was a reckoning long overdue. The marble halls of the courthouse echoed with the slow, deliberate footsteps of Malcolm Rivera. Each step sounded heavier than the last, like memories dragging chains behind him. He'd been in this building more times than he could count, testifying in significant cases, investigating internal misconduct, mentoring younger officers about integrity and restraint. But this wasn't another day at work. This was personal. He stood at the threshold of courtroom 3B, hand resting briefly on the cold brass handle. Through the small window, he could see Callahan at the far end of the courtroom, sitting upright, smug, one arm casually draped over the bench, the other thumbing through his phone like he didn't care in the world. Malcolm inhaled slowly through his nose. The scent of varnish, paper, and faint sweat filled his senses, just like when they first met. Years ago, Callahan had been a beat cop fresh out of training. Green, hot-headed, reckless. Even then, Malcolm had noticed the signs, the way he talked about those neighborhoods, the way he always had a good reason to escalate during stops that disproportionately affected Black and Latino men. But complaints never stuck. Too vague. No video, no leverage. Back then, Malcolm was just a sergeant. He'd filed reports. He'd warned supervisors. They hadn't listened. And part of him hadn't pushed hard enough. The system still felt like something that could be worked with back then. Something he could fix from the inside. But now, watching Callahan casually scroll through his phone in front of a judge, Malcolm felt the heat of that old shame clawing at his throat. He pushed open the door and walked in. Heads turned. There was a shift in the room's energy, subtle but palpable. Callahan looked up, and for a second, just a second, his eyes flickered with something that might have been discomfort. But then his grin returned, slow and oily, as he leaned back further into his chair like this was all one significant inconvenience. "Well, if it isn't the department's conscience," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "They really sent you to watch this circus?" Malcolm didn't respond. Not yet. He moved past the benches, settling silently in the front row behind the prosecution's table. though tucked into his breast pocket, his badge pressed against his chest like a quiet vow. The judge entered. "All rise." The gavel hit. And so began the slow unspooling of the case. Witness testimonies, grainy surveillance footage, and Callahan's carefully worded statements, peppered with practiced righteousness. But Malcolm wasn't here for the performance. He was here for what couldn't be staged. Because Malcolm heard the subtext behind every word Callahan uttered, about keeping the city safe, about having to act fast when he believed he was in danger. The same old dog whistle language, the coded phrases that had allowed so many officers like him to get away with so much. And when the court adjourned for a brief recess, Malcolm stepped into the hallway. The low murmur of voices was swallowed by his thoughts. "Rivera," the voice came from behind him. He didn't have to turn around to know. Callahan walked up beside him. Cocky as ever, arms crossed, posture relaxed like they were just two old friends catching up. "Didn't expect to see you here," Callahan said, smirking. "Thought you retired into paperwork." Malcolm glanced sideways, saying nothing. Callahan leaned in. "You know this is all political, right? They need someone to crucify for the press. I'm the sacrificial lamb this month. You know how this goes." Malcolm turned then, slowly, and in that moment something shifted in his eyes, something carved out of years of swallowing his anger, of biting his tongue while watching injustice dressed up as procedure. "You think I'm here because of politics?" Malcolm said quietly. Callahan raised an eyebrow, the smirk faltering just a bit. "No, Callahan. I'm here because I saw what you did. I saw the fear in that boy's eyes before you slammed him against the hood of your car. I saw the bruises you left behind, on his face, record, and future. And I saw how you laughed about it in the locker room after." Callahan's eyes darted, momentarily scanning the hallway to ensure no one else was listening. Malcolm stepped in, his voice low and cold. "You remember Marcus Valdez?" A flicker of recognition. Malcolm didn't blink. "You told everyone he reached for something, even though his hands were up the entire time. I interviewed the witnesses. I saw the footage before someone lost it." Callahan's jaw tensed. "You got away with it," Malcolm continued. "Again and again. Because people like me didn't push hard enough. Because the system made it easier to pretend you were just another overworked officer doing a tough job." Silence hung between them, like a live wire. "But not this time," Malcolm said. "Not with Jamal. Not with the new body cams. Not with the public watching." Callahan took a step back. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" "No," Malcolm said. "It makes me accountable." The courtroom doors reopened, a clerk waving for everyone to return. Malcolm brushed past him. As he sat down again, a strange sensation settled into his bones. Not victory, not yet, but a kind of alignment. The pieces were moving, and this time they were moving toward the truth. From the gallery, he watched as Callahan's swagger returned when the jury re-entered. But it was thinner now, less convincing. Because even Callahan could feel it. The storm was coming. And Malcolm Rivera, the man who had once stayed silent, was no longer holding back. The precinct felt unusually tense the next morning, the kind of stillness before a storm. Too quiet, too clean, too polite. Deputy Chief Malcolm Rivera stepped through the glass doors, his pressed Navy uniform impeccable, but his heart weighed heavier than his boots. Every nod from fellow officers felt a little too rehearsed. Every passing glance seemed to linger too long. He could feel it, the murmurs, the shift in temperature. Something was building, and he was at the center of it. Though not broadcast on TV, the incident from the courthouse had already gone viral within law enforcement circles. There were whispers in locker rooms, private messages pinging through encrypted group chats, and some calling him a traitor. Others said he did what they never had the courage to do. But he wasn't thinking about Whispers. He was thinking about the boy, Jalen. About the way Jalen's voice cracked as he recounted what had happened to him in that alley, surrounded by 3 patrol officers who had turned body cameras off like they were flipping light switches. About the bruises, the limp in his step. The look in his eyes said that they don't see me as a human. Rivera had kept that case file tucked in his briefcase for weeks now. He wasn't supposed to have it. Internal Affairs had shelved it. Too little evidence. Conflicting reports. No one wanted to mess with the old guard cops, especially not those with friends in the city council or the union. But Rivera had promised Jalen's mother he'd look into it. A promise that kept him up most nights. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a crusader. But he was a father. And if someone had done that to his child... As he reached his office, he saw the envelope. No name. Just his title scrawled in a rushed hand. Deputy Chief. He hesitated, then peeled it open. Inside, a single photo. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped. It showed a hallway inside the station. The restricted evidence room. A shadowy figure was near the lockers, clearly tampering with one of the digital recorders. No name, no accusation. Just evidence. Quiet, damning, undeniable. And it came with a second photo. This one hit harder. A still from a traffic stop 5 years ago. A young black woman pressed against the hood of a cruiser, her wrist bent awkwardly behind her back. The officer behind her was unmistakable, Lieutenant Carl Preston, smirking, wearing his mirrored aviators like he always did. Her face wasn't visible, but Rivera knew her. He had been a sergeant then. She was a young community liaison officer, a recruit full of fire and hope. Her name was Elise Monroe. She left the force a month later. No explanation. He clenched his jaw. Someone was trying to send a message, or a warning, or both. He slid the photos back into the envelope and locked them in his desk. His mind raced. This wasn't just about a bad officer. This was about a culture, one that protected itself, no matter how rotten they were, underneath the uniform. His phone buzzed. A text. Private meeting. Conef Room B. Now. DJ. Captain Diane Johnson. Rivera trusted her. One of the few. He made his way down the hall, nodding at passing officers, trying to look like everything was fine. Like he wasn't holding a grenade of truth under his jacket. When he opened the door, Diane was already there. Arms crossed, eyes sharp. She didn't waste time. "You saw the photos?" she asked. He nodded. "Did they come from you?" "No," she said, "but I know who sent them. Someone inside. Someone is tired of covering for men like Preston and Daniels. They're trying to leak just enough to force your hand." Rivera looked at her, his voice low. "And if I don't act?" "Then it goes public," Diane said, tapping her fingernail on the table. "And we all go down. The entire precinct." There was silence between them. A heavy silence laced with memories of cases suppressed, victims ignored, and truths buried beneath bureaucracy. He looked up. "Then we act." She studied him. "You sure? Once you start this, there's no walking it back. Preston has pull. Daniels is untouchable. You go after them and you better come with an army." Rivera stood. His hands weren't shaking anymore. "I'm done waiting for someone else to clean this up." She nodded slowly, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "Then let's get to work." That afternoon, Rivera didn't sit in his office. He walked the floors. He visited every department, every bullpen, every corner where whispers festered. And when he entered the briefing room, where Preston and Daniels often held court, he didn't ask permission. He stepped to the front, tapped the mic. Silence followed. "I'm reopening the Jalen Morris case," he said. Murmurs. A shift in chairs. Disbelief. "I know what some of you are thinking. I've heard the rumors. Let me be clear. If you wear this badge, then you answer to the law, not your ego, not your old habits, and not your partners. Turn in your badge now if you can't live with that." No one moved. But the air in the room changed. The power dynamics cracked. Preston, sitting at the back, raised an eyebrow. "You accusing someone, Deputy Chief?" he asked, smiling. "Not yet," Rivera said, locking eyes with him. "But I'm not staying quiet anymore." And then he turned, walked out, and left a room of officers sitting in the cold wake of a man who had finally chosen a side. That night, Rivera drove home without the radio on. His thoughts spun in silence. It had begun. The confrontation wasn't loud, not yet, but something had shifted. He had drawn the line, and from now on, every step would be war. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like a man who might finally do more than survive the system. He might just change it. When Malcolm Rivera submitted the report, a silence fell over his department. One that didn't feel like respect. It felt like pressure. Like the air just got sucked out of the building and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. He knew what he'd done. Not just filed a complaint, but torn a hole in the unwritten contract that governed the force. You didn't report your own. Not if you wanted to survive. And Malcolm hadn't just reported anyone. He had handed in a comprehensive, evidence-backed case file against Lieutenant Garrett Dwyer, one of the department's most decorated veterans. Behind those medals was a record of intimidation, racial profiling, and excessive force that had been ignored for years until now. Malcolm had kicked the hornet's nest, and now the swarm was stirring. It began small, as all threats do when dressed in official policy. A subtle shift in patrol schedules. His name was removed from interdepartmental briefings without notice. Meetings he was supposed to be in were suddenly moved. Doors closed just as he arrived. Then came the random internal audits. Requests for his expense reports from 3 years back. A memo citing pending review of conduct with no specifics. Malcolm played along, for now. He didn't need confirmation to know where it was coming from. Dwyer was untouchable to many in the department. Mentored by the former chief, the kind of officer who laughed with captains over beers and made backroom deals over retirements. He was the embodiment of the old guard. But Malcolm knew the truth. When power gets cornered, it lashes out. The first real blow came late on a Wednesday. He walked into his office to find 2 uniformed officers waiting for him. They were not from his own precinct, outsiders. One was from internal affairs, and the other was from professional standards. "Deputy Chief Rivera," one of them said, barely disguising the satisfaction in his tone. "You've been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately pending the outcome of an ongoing review." Malcolm didn't flinch. "Review of what?" "We're not at liberty to disclose that at this stage." "Of course you're not," he said calmly, removing the lanyard from his neck and placing it gently on the desk. "But I think we both know." They escorted him out like he was a suspect. A slow, humiliating walk down the hall, past desks that had once saluted him. No one met his eyes. Except one. Detective Sharon Lynn, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, principled. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. But she stood. That was enough. News travels fast when the silence is orchestrated. Within hours, a leak had anonymously surfaced claiming Rivera was under investigation for misuse of departmental funds, an accusation with no teeth, no evidence, but enough smoke to blur the public's vision. Local news picked it up within a day. The headlines didn't scream guilt, but they didn't ask questions. The exact recycled phrases, Under investigation? Sources close to the department. Internal conflict. They didn't say his name with reverence. They said it with suspicion. But Malcolm knew the playbook. Smear first, punish second, bury third. What they didn't know was that he'd seen it all before. At home, the air was different, quieter. Not from fear, but from tension. His wife, Elena, didn't ask what happened. She knew. She sat beside him on the couch, her hand resting quietly on his knee. "They think if they take the badge," she said softly, "they take your voice." Malcolm looked at her, his jaw tight. "They're going to come harder now." "Then let them. You've already torn the veil. Now they're scared." He nodded. Not because he was fearless, but because he had no choice but to be. The next blow wasn't silent, a break-in. The next morning he returned from a quiet walk to find his garage door pried open, his car ransacked, his work laptop gone, and files from his home desk scattered. It wasn't random. They hadn't touched his TV, left his watch. Even his wallet, sitting on the kitchen table, was untouched. This was a message. Malcolm stood in the wreckage and took a slow, steady breath. Then he picked up his phone. "Sharon, I need to meet, not at the station. Somewhere quiet." They met at an empty church parking lot after sundown, the yellow-orange glow of the street lamps casting long shadows between them. "You were right," she said before he even spoke. "Something's moving. I overheard Dwyer yesterday. He's got someone scrubbing case files. Anything with your name on it." Malcolm didn't react. "They broke into my house." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you going public?" "Not yet. I want them to think I'm cornered, desperate. That's when they'll make mistakes." She nodded, hesitating. "There's something else." "What?" "The complaint you filed? It's been sealed. Internal Affairs won't touch it. It's like it never existed." Of course it had. They were erasing him. But he had planned for that. "I made copies," he said simply. "Hard and digital, hidden in 3 different places." Sharon gave a half smile. "You always were 5 steps ahead." "Not enough," Malcolm said. "Not yet." That night, as the city turned quiet, Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, staring at the manila envelope in front of him, one of 3. Inside were names, photos, and imprints, testimonies of the victims Dwyer had brutalized. One was a kid, 16, shoved face first into asphalt for loitering. Another, a father arrested in front of his daughter for matching a description. None of them ever got justice. Until now. He slid the envelope back into its hiding place. They thought they were winning. But Malcolm Rivera wasn't fighting for his badge anymore. He was fighting for every person they had silenced. And that war had just begun. The hallway outside Malcolm Rivera's office had never felt this loud before, not because of noise, but because of pressure. People whispered, paused in mid-step, glanced quickly at the closed blinds covering his window. Something was shifting. An electric tension that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Inside, Malcolm sat still. His office was dark, except for the soft glow of his desk lamp, casting a golden hue over a man deep in thought. In front of him lay a single photograph, a snapshot of him in uniform, arm draped protectively over the shoulder of a teenage boy. That boy, Marcus Delgado, now stood at the heart of a city-wide reckoning. A boy was wrongfully arrested. A boy was beaten. And a boy whose story Malcolm had once tried to bury beneath silence. But silence, as he now realized, was combustible. It didn't vanish, it waited, and now it had exploded. 2 nights ago, a leaked video from a body cam, one Malcolm hadn't even known still existed, had gone viral. It showed Officer Bramley, the same officer Malcolm had filed a complaint against 10 years earlier, shoving Marcus against a squad car, fists clenched, voice laced with venom. The boys' cries for help echoed against brick and asphalt, and it was clear. There had been no resistance, no aggression, just fear and helplessness. The footage hit the internet like wildfire. At first, it sparked quiet outrage. Pockets of social media lit up in disbelief. But then, something bigger happened. A national journalist picked it up. The clip ran on the evening news. By morning, hashtags were trending. #Justice for Marcus. #Who protects us. And Malcolm Rivera's name was at the center of it. Because in the aftermath, people started digging. They discovered his internal memo years ago. He had warned about Bramley's conduct, had pushed for disciplinary action, had filed paperwork that mysteriously vanished before it reached the chief's desk. They unearthed testimony from other officers who had seen Malcolm try to do the right thing, only to be silenced by the weight of tradition, rank, and a department steeped in fear. By noon, a rally had formed outside City Hall. By 2 o'clock, CNN had called for an interview. Malcolm Rivera received a summons to appear before the City Oversight Committee by 4. The world had begun to watch. Malcolm didn't exit through the back when he finally left his office that day. He walked straight through the front doors of the precinct, head high, posture squared, not with arrogance, but with quiet intention. Every step was a message. I'm not hiding anymore. Outside, he was met with a sea of cameras. Reporters pressed forward, lights flashing like strobe bombs, microphones extended toward his mouth. But it wasn't the press that caught his eye. It was the faces. Dozens of them. Black, brown, Asian, white. Teenagers holding cardboard signs, mothers with strollers, older veterans in faded caps. They weren't shouting. They were watching. They had come not to riot, not to burn the system down. They had come to see what Malcolm Rivera would do next. Deputy Chief Rivera, do you have a statement about the Marcus Delgado footage? Someone asked. Another. Did you know about Officer Bramley's record? Why didn't you stop him? Malcolm's gaze didn't flinch. He took the microphone slowly from the cluster and brought it to his lips. What you saw, he began, isn't just one bad officer. It's the result of an entire structure built to protect itself. I tried to speak out before. I was shut down, not by a single person, but by a system that rewards silence. Gasps, scribbling, the clicks of cameras. I didn't do enough, he continued. That's on me. But today, I'm not staying quiet. The words hung in the air like an oath. That night, national anchors replayed the clip of his statement. Pundits debated whether he was a hero or a coward, reclaiming the narrative. Civil rights leaders began demanding formal accountability. Within hours, Malcolm was invited to appear on 60 Minutes. A member of Congress tweeted support for a full investigation into the department. But behind the public swell, Malcolm's world was shifting too. He returned home to find his brother, Raphael, sitting silently on the porch. They hadn't spoken in months, since Malcolm refused to testify against a senior officer. Raphael, a public school teacher and lifelong activist, had accused him of being complicit. You wear the badge, he'd said bitterly, but it's killing our people. That night, Raphael stood slowly, met his brother's eyes, and opened his arms without a word, just a nod. They embraced. Not because everything was healed, but because something had cracked open. The following day, Malcolm found his inbox flooded. Some messages were death threats, anonymous, cruel, and expected. But more were letters of thanks, from former cadets, from mothers, from other cops who'd kept their heads down too long and were now wondering if it was time to lift them. The narrative had shifted. Malcolm was no longer a footnote in someone else's scandal. He was becoming the symbol of it. Which is why, that afternoon, the city's police union held a press conference of their own. And it was brutal. Deputy Chief Rivera's statements, the spokesperson began, are a betrayal. They dishonor the badge. They incite division. He has chosen public spectacle over internal discipline. They announced an internal ethics review against him. Malcolm watched the broadcast from his office, lips pressed into a thin line. He felt the storm coming, but for once, he didn't feel alone in it. Hours later, a knock came at his door. It was Detective Avery, an officer known for keeping his head down and playing the game. Malcolm had mentored him years ago. "Sir," Avery said quietly, "I know what they're trying to do. They want to paint you as a rogue, but you're not. You're doing what we all wish we could have done. I just wanted to say I've got your back, however this plays out." Malcolm nodded, emotion tugging at his throat. Outside the precinct, the protests had grown, but they were still peaceful. Candlelight vigils now lit the steps. A makeshift memorial had formed, a photo of Marcus Delgado surrounded by flowers, candles, and messages scribbled in Sharpie. One sign caught Malcolm's eye. He spoke. Now we listen. In the mirror that night, Malcolm studied the lines on his face, the creases born of years spent watching, calculating, enduring. But tonight, something felt different. He wasn't just enduring, he was being seen. And for the first time in a long time, the world wasn't just looking away, it was leaning in. And he was ready. The walls of Malcolm Rivera's office were no longer silent. They whispered. They hissed. Ever since the footage surfaced, since the press conference where Rivera demanded internal investigations into officers long protected by the badge, he could feel the building turning on him. Not overtly, not yet, but with cold shoulders, tight-lipped nods, and long silences that dragged like the hush before a gunshot. He knew it would come. He just didn't expect it to come so fast. It started with a memo. A curt, vaguely worded internal directive was sent from the chief's office. Deputy Chief Rivera is to suspend his involvement in active disciplinary inquiries until further notice, pending clarification of procedural boundaries. That was code. Back off. He printed it, folded it, and tucked it into his jacket pocket without flinching. But something inside him did flinch, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The machine was waking up, and it was hungry. Across the precinct, Sergeant Wallace, once warm, had begun to avoid eye contact. The admin clerk stopped slipping his coffee into the break room. Even the rookies passed him silently, their uncertainty hanging in the air like smoke. It wasn't just silence, it was the strategy. They were isolating him. It wasn't paranoia, it was protocol. The system had its ways. Subtle, surgical. It didn't need to fire him outright. Not when it could bleed him out slowly, cutting him from support, fraying his alliances, stripping him of his influence inch by inch. And then it escalated. Anonymous complaints, Internal Affairs called them. One claimed he had tampered with case files, and another accused him of using his rank to intimidate fellow officers. Both allegations were vague, baseless, but dangerous because even lies can live long enough to infect trust. He sat in the IA room, stone-faced, as a younger investigator with too much swagger and not enough sense tried to corner him with bureaucratic traps. "We're just trying to understand, sir," the young man said, as if rehearsed. "Several officers claim your actions are outside department norms." "Which officers?" Malcolm asked, calm but cutting. "We're not at liberty to disclose." Malcolm leaned forward, voice low and ironclad. "Then don't insult me by pretending this is about transparency." The investigator looked away first. When Malcolm left the room, he saw the chief speaking to someone hushedly. They both stopped when they noticed him. The pause said more than words ever could. They weren't just fighting back. They were circling him. Still, Malcolm didn't stop. That evening, he met with Assistant District Attorney Carla Mendez, one of the few allies he had left who wasn't afraid to be seen with him. Carla's office was small, but its walls held truth. On one side, a photo of her late father, a civil rights attorney from Houston. On the other hand, her framed bar admission, still speckled with the champagne from the night she passed. "You're making them nervous," she said, sliding a thick envelope across her desk. Malcolm opened it slowly. Inside were photocopies. Dozens of them. Complaints, emails, even a few grainy photos of what appeared to be officers mishandling suspects in precinct garages. Cases that had been quietly closed, shelved, or lost. "They're preparing to bury these for good," Carla said, "and they're hoping you'll be too distracted trying to save your badge to notice." He didn't blink. "Then we give them no time to prepare," Malcolm said. "We go public." Carla hesitated. "You sure? Once we do this, there's no walking it back." He looked out her window, down at the city that had raised, broken, and rebuilt him. The concrete pulse of generations. The same streets where he had walked as a rookie. The same alleys where kids like him had been stopped, harassed, and sometimes never made it home. "I was born in this city," he said. "I've bled for it. They can take my title. They can smear my name. But they won't bury the truth. Not this time." And so it began. The story hit the local news that night. Deputy Chief Malcolm Rivera files ethics complaint against senior officers, calls for criminal review, and the headlines burned across social media. Comment sections exploded. Some cheered, others jeered. But what mattered was the message. Malcolm had just kicked the hornet's nest. By morning, the retaliation turned vicious. They pulled his patrol history, every traffic stop, every arrest. They dug into his personal life, leaked rumors to the press, and even twisted an old, resolved noise complaint from his teenage son's birthday into domestic disturbance tied to gang activity. "Classic playbook," Carla said, fuming. "Discredit the man, distract from the message." Even his home wasn't safe. He came home one night to find his tires slashed. A note taped to the windshield. "Quit while you still walk." His wife wanted him to leave town for a while. "Let things calm down," she pleaded. But Malcolm shook his head. "If I leave now," he said quietly, "I teach our kids that speaking out means surrender. I can't do that." In his bones, he knew. The system had always protected its own. But now the system was wounded, and wounded things lash out. And yet, that same week, something else happened. An officer from the 8th Precinct, young, black, new to the force, left a folded note in Malcolm's mailbox. "Sir, I saw what you did. I want to help." That was the part the system never counted on. The ones watching, the silent witnesses, the hidden allies, the future. And maybe, just maybe, the next domino was already trembling. The night was unusually still. Deputy Chief Malcolm Rivera sat alone in his office, the only light from the desk lamp casting a sharp glow across the walls. The precinct was quiet. Too quiet. Officers who used to greet him with forced smiles now avoided eye contact altogether. The silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. Something was about to break. He could feel it. The documents he'd uncovered over the past week, redacted reports, body cam footage, lost in transit, and questionable case dismissals, all pointed in the same direction. An internal cover-up of a system that had allowed abuse and discrimination to fester for years. But tonight wasn't about the paperwork. Tonight was about people. Rivera leaned forward and pressed play on the USB drive retrieved from a confidential evidence locker he had personally resecured after the break-in attempt 2 nights ago. The footage flickered to life. On screen, an officer, a rookie at the time, caught on hidden camera as he was hazed, coerced, and ultimately cornered into falsifying a report. The date was 5 years ago. The voice instructing him was unmistakable. Captain Hollis, one of the department's untouchables. Rivera clenched his jaw. He remembered that night. The suspect, a teenage boy, had been severely injured during the arrest. The officer who submitted the report claimed the boy fell. No excessive force, no questions asked. Except now, the truth sat in Rivera's hands. A knock broke the silence. Rivera turned quickly. At the door stood Officer Elena Soto, mid-30s, eyes wide, chest heaving. "We need to talk," she said. He motioned her in. She closed the door behind her like someone afraid of being watched. "They know I've been talking to you," she said without preamble. "My locker was trashed this morning. Someone left a dead rat in it. No note, but I got the message." Rivera stood slowly, eyes narrowing. "You've got protection, Officer Soto. You're not alone in this." She shook her head. "Not protection from the outside. It's the inside I'm worried about." Rivera handed her a glass of water. "You're doing the right thing. But I need more. I need names, statements, evidence they can't bury." Elena hesitated. "If I talk, really talk, there's no going back." Rivera's voice was low. "That's the point." She slid a folder across his desk. "It's all in there. Dates, names, times, Hollis, Calhoun, Officer Merritt, the quotas, the targeting, everything." Rivera flipped through the pages. His breath caught when he reached the photo. A young black man, no older than 17. Bruised, beaten. Name, Isaiah Walker. The file had been marked resisting arrest, but according to Soto's notes, he had been stopped for looking suspicious while walking home. His hand hovered above the desk. So many faces, so many names, so many silences. Not tonight. He looked up. "Thank you, Officer Soto. This changes everything." She nodded. "Just make it mean something. Please." By morning, Rivera had assembled a war room, internal affairs liaisons, civil rights liaisons, and a select few federal contacts. Not everyone was on his side, not yet, but cracks had formed, and Rivera would drive a wedge through them. At 8:00 a.m., he made the first call, a press briefing scheduled for 4:00 p.m. At 10 a.m., word spread through the department. There were nervous whispers in the hallways, and doors shut when he walked by. At 12:00 p.m., Sir Captain Hollis stormed into his office. "You're making a mistake," Hollis growled, tossing a file onto Rivera's desk. Rivera opened it. An old complaint, against him, dated years ago, anonymous, no merit. But still, an attempt. Rivera didn't even blink. "Is that the best you've got? You think you can clean house without blood on your hands?" Hollis sneered. "We built this department. We kept the streets clean. You start peeling back the layers, you won't like what you find." Rivera leaned forward, his voice ice cold. "Maybe not, but I won't be the one running from it." For a moment, the room crackled with tension. Hollis stood stiff, jaw clenched, but said nothing more. Then, without a word, he left. Rivera exhaled slowly. They were scared. Good. But fear made dangerous enemies. By 3:30 p.m., the media vans were parked outside headquarters. Reporters milled around, speculating. Social media had already erupted with rumors. Inside, Rivera stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his collar, steeling himself. This was the moment the city would see the truth. Not hearsay, not spin. Proof. But as he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed. A message. Blocked number. "We warned you. Next time it's your daughter." His heart stopped. His daughter, Lucia. He bolted back into his office and called her cell. No answer. Again. Voicemail. Again. Then, on the fourth try, her voice. "Papi?" Relief, then rage. "Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm at rehearsal." "Why? Is something wrong?" He let out a breath. "No, just check in with your mom. Stay inside, I'll explain later." She paused. "Papi, what's going on?" "I'm doing the right thing," he said softly. "That's all that matters." He hung up. They were playing dirty now, but he wasn't turning back. At 4:00 p.m., sharp, he stepped up to the microphone. Cameras clicked. Lights flared. The city waited. "My name is Deputy Chief Malcolm Rivera," he began, "and today I am breaking the silence." He held up the files. The names. The video. "This department has failed its citizens. For years, certain officers have operated with impunity, falsifying reports, abusing power, and targeting vulnerable communities." He looked straight into the lens. "That ends now." The silence afterward was deafening. And then, applause. Real applause. It wasn't over. But the crack had widened. And Malcolm Rivera was ready to shatter the wall. The headlines were everywhere. "Deputy Chief Malcolm Rivera blows the whistle." "Internal tapes reveal decade of abuse." "Justice or vengeance? A city on edge." It was no longer just about one man or one precinct. Rivera's revelations had cracked open a fault line beneath the city, and the tremors were now rippling outward through City Hall, the courts, and into every precinct where secrets had festered in the dark. And the system? The system wasn't taking it lying down. Malcolm sat in his modest office at 5:47 a.m., long before anyone dared to enter the building. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was loaded. Tense. He stared at the security monitor in the corner, something he'd had installed 3 days ago after the first anonymous threat. It hadn't been subtle. A single word spray-painted across his driveway. Traitor. 2 nights later, someone had slashed the tires on his wife's car. He hadn't told her. She was already sleeping with the lights on. The coffee in his cup had long gone cold, but Malcolm didn't flinch. He was past fatigue, past fear. What fueled him now was something more profound: the refusal to be silenced. But he knew. It was no longer just about what he was saying. It was what others were beginning to say too. Officers who had served silently for years, Latino, Black, Asian, even a few white ones, had begun showing up to internal affairs with sealed envelopes and flash drives. Quiet confessions. Body cam footage that had mysteriously disappeared from public records. Reports that had been rewritten to protect officers with badges and clean records stained by silence. Malcolm had become a symbol, not of power, but of defiance. And the system that had once protected its own was now mobilizing like a wounded animal. The blowback was brutal. A department-wide audit was halted without explanation. His assistant, Rosa, was abruptly reassigned without notice. 2 journalists who had requested an interview with Malcolm were arrested for interfering with an active investigation outside the station. And then the whisper campaign began. Talk radio accused him of faking evidence for political gain. A city councilman insinuated that Malcolm had deep personal grievances clouding his judgment. Social media bots flooded news threads with slander and conspiracy. But worst of all, people in uniform, who used to greet him with respect, now looked through him like he didn't exist. Like he was already a ghost. That afternoon, Rivera met with the city's Civilian Oversight Board. The air in the conference room was frigid, both in temperature and tone. 10 members sat behind a long walnut table, some nodding, others squirming, and a few actively avoiding his gaze. Deputy Chief Rivera, the chairwoman said, her voice polished but tired. There's been growing pressure from law enforcement unions to suspend your active duties pending the investigation. Rivera didn't blink. And from the public? A pause. They're divided. Of course they were. He leaned forward, voice calm but razor-edged. You've seen the tapes. You've read the transcripts. The question isn't whether I should be suspended. How many more officers will be if we keep pulling this thread? The room stiffened. One board member, a retired police captain, spoke. You're pushing hard, Malcolm, but you're not the only one with a past. You start this war, and the system will come for you with everything it has. Rivera met his eyes without flinching. Let it. That night, Rivera walked into the precinct and found his locker vandalized. His nameplate had been pried off, and someone had taped a photo of him and his son in its place, crossed out in red marker. His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't tear it down. He left it. Let them see he wasn't afraid of their games. But it wasn't a game anymore. When he stepped into the main bullpen, every conversation stopped. Every gaze turned icy. Dead man walking, someone muttered. Rivera scanned the room. No one made eye contact. The brothers in blue had turned their backs on one of their own. That night, he didn't go home. Instead, he met with Rosa and a small group of trusted allies. Officers, whistleblowers, activists, and one federal observer who had flown in from D.C. under the radar. They met in a library's quiet, windowless back room, long since forgotten by the public. What's coming next? Rosa asked, eyes weary but unflinching. Rivera exhaled. They're going to try and bury us, not just professionally. Literally, if they have to. The federal agent, a black woman in her 50s named Special Agent Carter, nodded. Which is why we're taking this federal. Tomorrow morning we file for full DOJ oversight. Civil rights violations. Systemic abuse. This isn't just corruption. It's state-sanctioned terror. Rivera sat back. It was happening. The moment he'd never thought would come. The moment the system turned on itself. But just as dawn broke the following day, the counterattack came. His home was raided. Not by internal affairs, but by men in uniform, tactical vests. No warning. They called it a targeted search based on probable cause. Malcolm's wife was dragged out barefoot. His teenage son was forced to the floor. Neighbors watched in horror. They said you're being investigated for treason, she screamed into the phone when Malcolm finally called her from Rosa's car. They said you're trying to dismantle law enforcement. He clenched the phone, his throat tight. This wasn't just retaliation. This was war. But he didn't back down. At 9 a.m., Malcolm walked into the press conference, tie straight, face calm, and stepped up to the podium in front of 24 cameras and a nation watching. He didn't yell, didn't rage. He simply held up a USB drive and said, "This contains proof of an internal system built on lies, brutality, and silence. They can raid my house, they can smear my name, but they will not stop the truth." Behind him, Agent Carter stepped forward and said 3 words that changed everything. The DOJ agrees. The room exploded in noise. Reporters shouted, flashing bulbs erupted. But Malcolm didn't flinch, because finally, after all the years of silence, of watching others suffer, of swallowing his pain, the system was no longer bulletproof, and for the first time, it was bleeding. The courtroom was silent, not just quiet. Silent, like a tomb sealed with the weight of centuries. The judge had spoken. The verdict was in, and the echoes of his voice still reverberated against the marble columns like a bell tolling for a funeral. Malcolm Rivera stood motionless, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He didn't flinch when the sentence was read. He didn't move when Officer Julian Crane was handcuffed, head lowered, shoulders no longer squared with arrogance, but bent with shame. Rivera simply stood there, spine like steel, his face unreadable. But his eyes, they told a different story. Pain. Not triumph. Not relief. Pain. Because this wasn't just a victory in court, but a rupture. A wound torn open not just in the city's police department, but in its soul. In his. Outside the courthouse, the wind swept through the gathering crowd. Protest signs, once clutched in anger, now hung limp at people's sides. The chants had stopped. The fists lowered. Justice, real, unequivocal justice, had been seen. And it had come not with spectacle, but with solemnity. A reporter shoved a microphone toward Malcolm when he stepped through the courthouse doors. "Deputy Chief Rivera, you led the investigation that brought down one of your own. What message does this send?" He paused, the weight of the question pressing against him. Cameras buzzed, eyes locked on him, waiting for something memorable. He looked into the lens and said quietly, "No badge is above the truth. That silence is complicity, and that this department, starting today, chooses courage over cover-up." He didn't wait for more questions. He turned and walked, his long coat catching in the wind like a curtain closing on a tragic act. The fallout came fast. 3 captains were quietly removed within 48 hours. Internal Affairs opened legacy case reviews spanning a decade. The union, once untouchable, was subpoenaed. Anonymous tip lines flooded with calls, some bitter, some brave, many both. One former officer left a voicemail saying, "I should have spoken up. I was there. I saw what Crane did to that kid. I told myself I didn't know, but I did." Rivera listened to that voicemail alone in his office, long after sunset. He played it 3 times, then deleted it. Not because it didn't matter, because it did. But he couldn't bear the sound of remorse from a man who had waited until it was safe. The city called him a hero. Commentators dissected his every word. The quiet reformer. The man who wouldn't back down. But behind closed doors, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt hollow. Because every headline praising him reminded him of the years he'd kept his mouth shut, of the promotions he hadn't questioned, the corruption he'd sensed but rationalized, the times he'd told himself it wasn't his fight. It had always been his fight. He was just too scared to step in. One evening, he stood in front of the Rivera family brownstone, staring at the cracked concrete steps he used to race up as a boy. His mother had long since passed, but the house still held ghosts of her voice, her wisdom, and the father who'd raised him to respect the law, but question the men who wore it. His younger brother, Ernesto, opened the door. They hadn't spoken since the video went viral. "I didn't think you'd come," Ernesto said. "I almost didn't," Malcolm replied. Inside, they sat on the old leather couch that squeaked under the weight of memory. "I'm proud of you," Ernesto said finally. Malcolm blinked. "You were the first to call me a coward when I stayed quiet." "I was angry. Still am," Ernesto admitted. "But I saw you on that stand. You didn't flinch. You looked the city in the eye and said, 'We failed.' That takes more than bravery. That takes truth." Malcolm leaned back, the guilt in his chest loosening for the first time in weeks. Not disappearing, but loosening. 2 days later, he returned to the precinct. The atmosphere had changed. The looks were different. Some eyes met his with newfound respect, others with resentment. The air buzzed with rumors about who would be next, what investigations were quietly unfolding, which names would be called into the captain's office and told to clear out their desks. But Rivera wasn't interested in politics anymore. He was interested in change. He stood in a conference room with peeling paint and flickering lights before 24 rookie recruits. Fresh faces. clean slates. "You won't learn policing from textbooks," he told them. "You'll learn it from choices. From the moment you look at a suspect and wonder if your judgment is shaped by training or bias. From how you respond when your partner steps over the line. Whether you write the truth in your report or rewrite it to match the narrative." They listened, wide-eyed. Some scribbled notes. Others just watched, absorbing. Being a good cop isn't about force. It's about restraint. It's about knowing when to act and when to have the guts to speak when nobody else will. He stepped back. The silence that followed was the kind that didn't need filling. Later that night, Rivera visited the makeshift memorial at the corner of 47th and Delaney. It was where 16-year-old Miguel Arroyo had died years earlier, shot by Officer Crane during what the official report called a justified encounter. Rivera now knew better. That report was one of many falsified, and that moment was one of many buried. A single candle flickered beside Miguel's faded photo. Malcolm knelt down, lighting another. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Too late, but not too late for the others. He stood as the wind rustled the flowers, the streetlight humming overhead. He walked away, his silhouette long against the pavement. The final act of justice came not with a gavel, but a letter. Malcolm Rivera submitted his resignation 3 weeks later, not in disgrace, but in purpose. "I've done what I came here to do," the letter read. "Now this department needs new hands, eyes, and a voice that carries what we've learned into a future I no longer fear." He didn't vanish. He didn't disappear into silence. He became something else. A speaker. A teacher. A mirror held to a broken system, and a builder of one that might yet stand. Narrator's closing voice. YouTube style. Malcolm Rivera didn't set out to be a hero. He just stopped being silent. And in doing so, he reminded a city that silence is the soil where corruption grows. But the truth? Truth is fire. And once lit, it spreads. If you believe more people need to hear stories like this, where truth doesn't just survive but reshapes the world, click like, subscribe, and share. Because this isn't just a story, it's a warning and a promise. If you're sitting there with a knot in your stomach, with your fists clenched, with a burning in your chest, that means you heard the story. You felt it. And you understand what so many still refuse to see. That injustice doesn't disappear when someone wears a badge. Sometimes that badge becomes the mask of injustice that hides behind. Let that sink in. Deputy Chief Malcolm Rivera was one of their own. Not a protester, not an outsider, not someone looking to burn the system down. He was the system, or at least he tried to be its conscience. He wore the uniform, he followed the rules, he rose through the ranks, believing change could come from within. And what did he get for it? They raided his house, threatened his daughter, painted him as a traitor, all because he dared to expose the rot they had long accepted as usual. That should make your blood boil, because this wasn't just about one bad cop. This wasn't just about one department. It was a machine designed to protect itself, even if it means destroying the very people it's sworn to serve. Even if it means crushing the truth beneath paperwork and silence. But Rivera didn't stay silent. He chose the harder path. He risked everything, his badge, his reputation, his family's safety, to say enough is enough. So what do we take from this? We learn that silence is not neutral. When you stay silent in the face of wrongdoing, whether in your job, your school, your neighborhood, your country, you become part of the harm. And when someone like Malcolm Rivera finds the courage to speak, we owe it to him, and to ourselves, to listen, to support, and to act. Because here's the hardest truth of all. It took decades of quiet to let this kind of rot grow. It'll take even more voices, hours, to tear it out. So ask yourself, what would you do if you were in Rivera's shoes? Would you speak? Would you resist? Would you risk everything to protect someone else's child? Because if the answer is yes, then this can't just be a story you watched. Hit that like button if you believe Malcolm Rivera's courage matters. Leave a comment to stand with him, and every victim still waiting for justice. Share this video so others can't ignore it. And most importantly, subscribe. Because on this channel, we're not here to entertain. We're here to expose, to uplift, to fight. The next story could be happening right now, in your city, your school, your neighborhood. And when it surfaces, we'll be here to tell it. Because the system didn't break overnight. And we won't fix it by staying quiet. This isn't the end of Malcolm Rivera's story. It's the beginning of all the ones it will empower. Stay angry, stay aware, stay loud. We'll see you in the next video.